start. And then maybe just an email out to all the task force members, just reminding them that we're live. My webinar link showed up in my less important Outlook folder rather than in my primary Outlook folder. So you might tell folks to look there if they're having a hard time joining.
Okay, Madam Chairman, we're live.
Okay. So, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the Indian Child Welfare Task Force Committee, today is Monday, September 25th. It's a little after 1 o'clock. We're going to be meeting to talk about a few items that are posted publicly on our agenda. The first item on our agenda is a roll call. So, LSO, would you mind calling the roll?
Senator Case,
Excused?
Representative Chadwick. I see him online. Ms. Bering,
Excused.
Ms. Johnson,
Here.
Mr. Large,
Excused?
Ms. Playton,
Excused.
Ms. Returns to War,
Excused.
Ms. Smith,
Present.
Ms. Logan,
Excused?
Chairman Ellis,
Present?
Co-Chairman Larson.
Here.
Okay. So looking at that, I don't know that we necessarily have a quorum to move forward with recommendations, Mr. Co-Chairman. Would that be a fair assessment?
That's my take as well.
Yeah. I hate to proceed too far down the path without getting a little bit more of a critical mass online. Is there any way that LSO, if you could just send a high priority email to members of the task force, letting them know that we lack a quorum and would really appreciate them jumping on as soon as possible. And how about we take a break and come back at 1:15 and hopefully get some more people online. I think 10 minutes.
I'll send it to the case.
Yep. And if we could start sending, if you have any of those individuals that serve on the task force, if you have their contact information, want to shoot them a text or anything, that would be helpful. But let's not just stare at each other. Let's give ourselves 10 minutes to see if we can get more people online.
Okay, thank you.
All righty. All righty, Ella, so we can probably come back. I think we've got another task force member who was able to join. Ella, so whenever you want to bring us back, we can leave our break.
Madam Chairman, we're ready.
Okay, thank you. All righty, task force members, we're back. I believe Miss Baring was able to join us. Welcome. Just want to confirm that we can hear you through the audio and see you maybe on your camera. Miss Baring, are you there?
Yes, I am. Sorry,
Okay, thank you. All righty, so we have 6 members of our 11-person task force, so welcome. My co-chairman and I have had some conversations about moving forward on some of the last action items that were brought up during the first ICWA task force meeting back in July. Mr. Co-chair, before we jump into the bill draft that is included in the meeting materials, did you want to offer any opening remarks?
Well, Madam Chairman, I think if I may, I would voice just a little concern and maybe we can have this conversation a little bit, but a lot of the conversation we're going to have are going to impact the tribes here in the state, and then as well impact how our judiciary folks administer perhaps potential impacts around the state and not on the reservation. And I don't know that we don't have some of those individuals here that I think would be inclined to participate. So on the safe haven law, it would kind of be my opinion initially that we would want to consider strengthening our state ICWA law to make sure that it's covered in safe haven. I think that we had quite a bit of discussion on the delinquency matter last time, and on whether we leave delinquency in that draft bill or remove them out. And I think further investigation would and visit with the AG and the agency would perhaps suggest that we correct that and amend it to comply with federal law. But I know that there were some concerns or some hopes maybe from some of the tribal members that we would at least have that conversation further, that we could do that again. So I'm, as before we make recommendations, I hate to make recommendations on these. Oh, and then the tribal attorney admissions was brought up about perhaps being able to have on ICWA cases have attorneys not licensed in the state be able to represent respective tribes on those positions. And we've reached out to the Trial Lawyers Association, others, and I think that that's another important conversation that we ought to have between. And so we have a quorum, Madam Chairman, you and I, we can move forward. And I see, I hate to schedule a meeting and not move forward, but I would voice a little hesitancy because we don't have some of the players, the stakeholders that we've always wanted to include in this conversation that aren't here. And so it might be, what are do you have feelings one way or the other?
Yeah, I'm certainly welcome feedback from committee members on this as well, our task force members. We technically have a quorum, but I think that our desire is to really kind of see if we can get to some consensus on these important issues. And it's hard to do that when we're missing about half the task force. So I share your concern on that. That said, we have this meeting in place. And so I don't want to delay work either. So, if anyone wants to chime in, just get my attention right now, and we can, if you want to weigh in on proceeding, or if you feel like we need to slow down and try and find another time, we can do that too. I'm looking for feedback because I'm really, this is a tough one.
Director Schmidt has her hand up.
Oh, Director Schmidt, and I'm working from my phone. My computer audio is not working well, so I apologize if I'm not navigating this.
And then Jill's on. Hi, Jill. She's after quorum.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. I think the larger conversation around safe haven and some of the other topics may be worthwhile to postpone those conversations if we want, so that there's more people. I do think the delinquency proposed legislation we discussed it quite a bit last time, and we have a proposed draft. I mean, my recommendation would be that at least we hit that, and then maybe table the others if we don't feel like we quite have enough members to have valuable conversations.
Okay. And then, Mr. Co-Chair, did you see who had their hand up next? Sorry.
Jill Logan does.
Oh, Jill. Perfect. Oh, and then that's another person on another additional person. Miss Logan.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I just recently got appointed and just actually got notice of this this morning, and I have court again here in about 5 minutes, so I'm going to have to leave you. I don't know if that affects your quorum or not, but I am happy to postpone because I am just trying to play catch up And I apologize. I didn't even know this was happening today until I got to work this morning. So I'm just trying to juggle and be in many places at once. So I apologize. I am going to have to leave in about 5 minutes for another hearing, but I'm happy to participate going forward if I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Logan. I appreciate, welcome aboard. We appreciate you volunteering your time to serve on this task force. Okay. Anyone else want to weigh in on, Director Schmidt makes an offer that we could at least have the delinquency conversation and on the bill draft, and then maybe have a, further conversation about the safe haven laws and the other issues on the agenda at a further meeting or a future meeting. Does anyone else have a strong preference on what we do and how we proceed today? I'm looking to see if anyone's raising their hand. I raised my own hand. Not helpful.
So, Madam Chairman, I move, this would be a motion that the task force is that due to the numbers, Jill's going to have to sign off here really quick. And Jill, we understand and thank you. And I may give you a call and kind of share with you some things that we're doing just before you go. But my motion would be to go ahead and hear the delinquency bill, and then we table everything else until the next meeting.
Okay. Was that a second I heard?
Yes.
Okay, second by Representative Chadwick. All those in favor of my co-chairman's motion, please say aye or raise your
Aye.
virtual.
Aye.
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 And LSO, I think, are you tracking
Claire.
that?
Claire and Verna Lynn have raised their hand as an aye.
Okay. All those opposed to the motion, raise your hand or say no. Okay, it looks like the motion passed. So we will proceed to discuss the bill draft that's on the agenda, and then we will put the other items. We'll resurrect them at a future date and time. So the first bill that we have for bill draft we have for consideration, we'll have LSO explain what this does.
Thank you, Madam Chair. David Hopkinson with the Legislative Service Office, walking through 24 LSO 167, Working Draft 0.3, Indian Child Welfare Act Delinquency Amendments. This draft, or the intent of the draft, is simply to remove references in the law that was passed last year, codifying ICWA, references specifically to delinquency actions. As federal law does not apply to delinquency actions, and it was a little unclear with our language in the Wyoming ICWA whether or not it does apply to delinquency petitions. So what this draft does on page 2, the first thing there in section 1 is it goes into last year's session law and just amends the section 3 where it specifies what the act applies to and strikes on lines 7 and 8 delinquency petition. And then section 2 repeals Wyoming statute 146201D, which was created by last year's ICWA law. And the staff comment there at the bottom of page 2 is what that statute reads currently.
And that's in 146201D.
That's correct. And so that language at the bottom of the page is what would be being repealed there, and it's just removing that section which applies to delinquent acts or delinquency petitions. The staff comment on the first page just kind of notes the reason we're going into amend the session law is simply for clarity, to make very clear that this does not apply or is not intended to apply to delinquency petitions. It would be effective July 1st, 2024. And with that, I would stand for any questions on the draft.
David, I had a question for you. I am a big fan of leaving prior session laws approval. Like, I think that if we want to make things clearer, you just include language in the current session law. And so I know like it's intended to provide clarity, but I feel like going back and amending session law when we don't reprint those books doesn't make anything clearer. I was wondering if internally, if LSO had that discussion about why we are starting to do this more often. My preference would if we move forward with this, would be just to have a clean repealer bill. And then along those lines, and this would be looking for the department's guidance. If we were just to do a clean, 14.6.201D is repealed bill, maybe this question's for Director Schmidt, if we have any guidance on how our Attorney General's office will, if that provides the clarity, or if they're insistent that we have to go back and amend the session law. So I'm just a little unclear on this, but I'm seeing this issue pop up more and more frequently.
Madam Chair, from LSO's perspective, just for the clarity, we wanted to amend that session law, but I don't think the feeling internally was particularly strong. If the preference is to not amend the session law, I think that would be just fine as well. But I would be interested to see what what Director Schmidt has to say on that.
Madam Chairwoman, what I don't understand, and this is just me not really understanding how this works, but the 14-6-201 is in statute now. It's not a session law is necessarily. If I look at the statute, you see that 14-6-201D is actually listed. So I don't know if you need to do a repealer or if you actually need to pull that and strike it from the statute. But it is, when I was looking at Title 14 online, it does have D listed in there.
And I may have misspoke. I meant D, 14.6.201D. And then there's the paragraph. My only concern is that if, we just do a clean repealer that gets rid of it, if our Attorney General then will come back and say, well, you guys didn't go back and amend your session law. Now we're confused and we don't know how to administer this, which I've seen that happen a lot lately too in my service.
Madam Chairman, I'm a little confused. Are you saying then that as written, it would only repeal it in statute and not address session law?
Correct.
And I'm not understanding why it would not make the correction any place it's written, session law and statute. Why is that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. So I think session law is, intended to capture things that aren't codified. And so we have this reference to the session law on lines 5 through 12. But if you're following the legislative history of what we do, we pass this bill and then that goes away. So no one's going to go back and look at amending what we amended in session law. And so
Section 3 is session law.
Correct.
And Section 2 is statute, right?
So if we just pass Section 2 as Section 1, that's the only thing the bill says, 14.6.201D is repealed, then I feel like that takes care of it. And like, it's a little more accurate to the legislative history. But it's just this thing that we do in I've just started seeing LSO do more and more of, is going back and amending session law when we don't go back and reprint those books. So if you have a session law book and you read it, you wouldn't know that that language had been changed. So to me, it's a bit of a fiction that we go back and change that. It's like, I just think we should say, no, going forward from whenever this law becomes enacted, then that's the change we make.
And I realize for the rest of the task force, and please bear with us because we're talking kind of some internal stuff here on how this is. And so this session law that we get every year is a section is kind of a brown book, looks like this, that just takes care of things that are relevant that took place in this session. So David, if I want to track this again. So if we pass Section 3, if Section 3 was part of this bill and we're delinquent and Section 3 applies to session law and we make that correction, will that be noted in our next session law book, or will there not be any reference?
Mr. Chairman, certainly in the printed copy, there's not going to be a reference, obviously, back to the session law within the actual session law, but it would appear in the new session laws that it was going back to amend the previous session.
Right, so we've got session law from 2023 that has this language. And your session law from 2024 will make note of the change in the new change, right?
Correct.
Does it though? Wouldn't that say then 2024 session law shall read? This is going back to an old book. This won't be referenced in the new book, is how I look at these.
Madam Chair, the language of the bill or of this bill would be printed in the new session laws. I honestly will have to double check because I don't think that they go back to the old session law to change the language in the previous session law. So if you looked up 2023 session law, I don't know that it would include this new language because I don't think that is the standard practice. But I will double check on that and let you know.
And again, you two that are smarter than I. So what you're saying there is we don't go back and reprint a 2023 session law book. It stays printed, nothing new comes out. But the reference to this 2023 session law with this deletion of delinquency petition would be noted in the 2024 session law.
Correct.
I'll look in my book. I don't know that.
So let's just verify that, okay? And if that's the case, does that resolve your concerns, Madam Chairman?
No, it's not quite drafted. Like, I just don't have an answer on the drafting. I feel like I see more of this, like, we're going to go back in time and amend these session laws because it makes it clearer. But when I do legal research and I'm explaining like the history of a statute, I think this muddles up it's just a departure of what's necessary and how, we talk about these things. Because if anyone went back and read the session law, then they would look at the statute and go, where did this D paragraph go? Then they could look in the statute, like in the annotation for the statute, and go, oh, the legislature repealed it in 2024. Like, all that history is there. So when we do this fiction of we're going to go back and amend a law that expires, I mean, the session law is supposed to only exist for the session. I don't think we print everything that we did during the legislature in the session laws. But no, and I apologize, committee task force members, this is in the weeds, but just something that keeps coming up. And I just want to make sure I have the guidance from our executive branch and our legislative office on their drafting convention, how we do it. That said, this is fairly straightforward. The meat of it is section 2 on line 14 on page 2. It would remove this paragraph D from the statute and take away ICWA coverage for delinquency. So we can talk about the merits of that, if that's okay with you, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Please. And Director Schmidt has her hand up.
Yeah. And Director Schmidt, I know this is an issue that Family Services has raised, so would like to hear from you.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And just to kind of briefly touch back on the session law preference, you had asked what the AGs would prefer. They just messaged me and would prefer that the session law be amended. And I know this is attorney to attorney thing, so you just have that. The department really doesn't have an opinion on it, but the AG's office did express a desire to have the session law amended.
Thank you.
And then back to the question about the delinquencies. This was a conversation that we discussed a little bit at the last task force meeting. And really what the department's position is that for ICWA throughout the state, most of our ICWA cases are already covered through our contracts with both the Northern Arapaho and Eastern Shoshone business councils. And in those contracts, we cover a lot of how our work with both of those tribes actually happens. We do have a lot of discussions about delinquency charges per the contract, not per the statute, but per the contract. Why we would like to see this language repealed is for the rest of the state or any of the other ICWA cases that involve children that are not part of the Northern Arapaho or Eastern Shoshone tribes or part of those contracts. And there's a couple of reasons why we would like to see that repealed. First, the federal ICWA doesn't assume that there's any delinquency charges. The second part is, though, that then it can create a lot of confusion. We're concerned when the state of Wyoming reaches out to a tribe outside of the state and tries to start ICWA proceedings. And that's going to be something that many of them won't understand why we're doing it, because it doesn't apply under the federal law. I do recall that there was some concern in the last meeting by the representative of the county attorney's status, and I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, who's now a judge. But he had mentioned that if the delinquency component stayed in, that there may be some reservation of charging a child under juvenile court in the delinquency statutes, and it would rather go to an adult charge or through the circuit or district court because of all of the confusion. And ultimately, what a delinquency charge is, it's the behavior of the child. It's a delinquent behavior of the child in comparison to what is a more of a family issue in terms of preserving cultural and familial ties with members of the tribe. So that's where the department stands in regard to its request that this be considered.
Okay, thank you, Director Schmidt. Does anyone have any comments on this bill draft and this concept, or questions that you'd like us to discuss?
Madam Chair, can we let Senator Case into the meeting? I think he sent a message that he's having a hard time getting on, and so I don't see a chat. So this was the best way I could try to help him out. I told him he had to register and to get on, but he said he's trying.
Okay.
Somebody can help him. Thank you.
That would be a question for LSO, and they heard you, I think. And then welcome, Ms. Clayton. I don't think we had you online when we were doing roll call, so it's good to see you. Anybody else want to raise an issue or discuss a preference on whether or not we should proceed with the repeal of this particular paragraph? You know, Mr. Co-Chairman, I think that the department raises a pretty reasonable request. I can see where this creates confusion. I appreciate the additional information about agreements that exist with our tribes within Wyoming. But just kind of looking at it holistically, I can see where, you know, if this isn't consistent with federal ICWA, you know, having this new requirement, I think would create a lot of confusion, and that certainly wasn't our goal.
Madam Chairman, I then would make a motion that we adopt that we move 24 LSO 0167 and to a standing committee to consider for adoption in the next general session. And I would like to leave it a little broad there, because you would typically, that would maybe go to judiciary, and judiciary has got a huge number of bills this year. And so that might be something we direct back through tribal relations, and you work with another. In fact, maybe that, I think that would even be better yet. Could we just make the recommendation that the tribal relations committee pick up this bill and move it forward?
You've heard the motion. I think that's appropriate. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Representative Chadwick. So the motion is that this task force would recommend to the, I'm just kind of delaying a little. I'm trying to see if Senator Case jumps on. But the motion is to have this committee recommend that the delinquency paragraph found in 14-6-201D, that draft bill be referred to the Tribal Relations Committee. Just further clarity on that, you know, the Tribal Relations Committee will meet again in November. There are 6 members, legislators that serve on that committee. We would have it on our agenda. It would be open for public comment and testimony. And then we would vote on whether or not there's, we wanted to advance that to the session. And it would take a majority of vote of all 6 members. if the committee were to do that action, then, assuming it was introduced, it's a budget session, so we need a 2/3 majority in the chamber that the bill's introduced. From there, it would then be referred to the Judiciary Committee. So I just want to provide that because the Tribal Relations Committee will have public comment and testimony on it. And then once it gets to session, if it advances, there will be more public comment and testimony. So although, we're a little light on our members present today, that I do think that this is an important conversation and that we should advance it and keep it moving forward. So with that, Mr. Chairman, do you think it's appropriate to do a roll call?
I do think it's appropriate to do a roll call, and I would just, if I may, if this moves forward and is passed along, it doesn't have to go to Judiciary. We can work with leadership and find, if Judiciary is really swamped, we can find a place for it to go from Select Tribal.
Correct. So, but another committee vetting it. So we'll do a roll call vote. LSO, please.
Senator Case,
Excused?
Representative Chadwick,
Aye.
Ms. Baring,
Aye.
Ms. Johnson, I see that she's on, but she just needs to unmute to register her vote. Ms. Johnson,
Excused?
Mr. Large,
Excuse.
Excused?
Ms. Playton,
Aye.
Ms. Returns to War,
Excused?
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Ms. Logan,
Excused.
Chairman Ellis,
Aye. But we only have, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Co-Chairman Larson.
Aye.
Okay. So that motion passes 6-0. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Co-Chairman, we have reached the end of our agenda. I do want to ask if anyone had any comments about any of the issues that you were prepared to make today. Well, we welcome any of those comments about any of these issues. Any task force members. And then is there anyone LSO online that had registered to testify?
No, Madam Chairman.
Okay. Okay, unless I'm
Madam
missing,
Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chairman?
Madam Chairman, if I could just encourage the task force members to look through this material on the safe haven. There's a lot of great research there on the states that have adopted that ICWA language into their safe haven and those that haven't. I think we need to be prepared to respond. I think that this is a legitimate question that we ought to make a recommendation on in our next meeting.
I think that's good. Mr. Chairman, did you want to see if it would be appropriate also to show us what that might look like as a bill draft?
Yeah, that'd be great. And maybe we can work with Director Schmidt and maybe Claire Johnson even as well, if they have ideas on how they'd like that to look.
Okay, thank you. So, if anyone wants to has a strong desire to be part of that crafting of language, please let me and my co-chairman know, and we'll make sure that we loop you in on all of that. But otherwise, we'll just work with our attorneys and have something ready for our next hearing. So we
Donna,
can
love
look
to
at
hear
it.
from you. Anything on that, Kay? Okay.
Any other issues, Mr. Co-Chairman, or any other task force members before we sign off for the day?
Nope.
Okay.
We have weird days some days, and today's one of them.
I
Mary-
have one, Ms.
Oh,
Alice. This is Berna Lynn. I was just, if it's possible, if I could just sit on that to hear the language and just to be an observance and, learn and for the, for that part of this project, that'd be great.
thank you. We will make,
For the safe haven, yeah.
Yeah,
That'd be
and Verna Lynn, if if I may, what I'd like to do is, because it's not like we'll sit down and have a meeting on that.
Yeah.
But any recommendations, even if you go through and read that material, if
Yeah.
you could just include us and say, these are my thoughts on how this ought to do. And then each draft that LSO comes, we'll pass back out to the committee. This is before we have any, and then you can recommend we ought to clean this language up or that language up, and we can kind of come to an informal consensus. But you're welcome to participate and voice your thoughts on any of that, okay? But
Yes, thank you.
it really won't be, now what I was going to say is we probably won't there probably won't be a meeting set up between these folks. We're just going to kind of take some hearings or hear what they have to say back to LSO. If they do feel that they would like to kind of get a meeting together, we'll make sure that anybody that wants to participate in that can.
Great. It'd be a great learning experience, something that I could, learn
Sure.
and be a part of.
Working
you.
on favorite part of this process. So I think it's great. Thank you for volunteering. Okay. Anybody else have any other comments? Mr. Co-Chairman, are we ready to sign off?
Hasta la vista.
Okay. Thanks everyone for participating. We'll see you again in the future.